Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal. Today is June 3rd, and it's the anniversary of one of the most gruesome criminal abortion deaths. It really highlighted the amount of trouble somebody be willing to go to if they knew they could go to prison for screwing up. And I know pro-choice people are going to say, well, don't send them to prison for screwing up. And, you know, in this case, we have no way of knowing if it was the doctor's fault or not. And yes, it was performed by a doctor in his office. It was just a back alley abortion in that he surreptitiously brought her in, metaphorically, through the back alley. He arranged to meet her and her mother at 3 a.m. instead of just having her come to the office at a normal time. But it's from 1962, and there was a young woman named Barbara who was a college sophomore, and she went to her parents and told them that she was pregnant. And so she and her parents went to the boyfriend's house and talked to his parents. Now, the boyfriend wanted to get married. Barbara's parents say that they felt Barbara wasn't eager for marriage, but they also said that they thought it was a bad idea. So they left the boyfriend's home saying that they were going to take care of it. So they asked around for a reputable abortionist, and they got a referral to Dr. Harvey Norman Lothringer. And Lothringer was a Princeton graduate. He got his medical degree from the New York University Bellevue College of Medicine. So, you know, this was a reputable doctor. And, you know, back then doctors typically practiced, they had a, you know, doctor's office in their house. I remember going to one of those. So Barbara's parents, Dominic and Rose, took Barbara to see Lothringer on June 2nd of 1962. And they said he reassured them that even though she was 5 months pregnant, there was no danger. And they gave him a $500 down payment on the abortion. So Lothringer arranged to pick Barbara and her mother up at Grand Central Station at 3 o'clock the following morning. So Dominic and Rose took the train down. Dominic handed his wife and daughter off to Lothringer and a Cuban-born former stewardess named Terry, who served as Lothringer's receptionist. And Dominic got on a train and went back home, and Lothringer and Terry took Rose and Barbara to his office, which was in his 19-room, $85,000 home, which is worth over $800,000 in 2022 dollars. So they arrived just after 3 a.m. Rose handed over another $500, and Terry slipped away upstairs. And while Rose waited, Lothringer sent Barbara to a room and told her to report to remove her underwear. After he gave her an injection, she reported feeling ill, and he went back into his office and left her mother in the waiting room. About half an hour later, the receptionist woman appeared in the waiting room, and Rose fretfully asked her, "What's taking so long?" And Terry reassured her, "Don't worry, she's in good hands." About 5 a.m., Lothringer told Barbara's mother that she was all right but needed some oxygen. And then at around 7 o'clock, 7:30, he said that Barbara was resting comfortably, and told Rose to go ahead, go home and get some rest, and come pick Barbara up in the afternoon. So Rose called her husband saying, "You can come pick me up at the station." And Lothringer drove her to the nearest subway station so she could get to Grand Central to meet her husband. And when Dominic saw Rose, he asked, "How's Barbara?" And Rose said, "I didn't see her." And Dominic was shocked. "What, you didn't see her?" So instead of going home, the two of them drove over to Lothringer's place and rang and rang and rang and could not raise anybody but a dog who just barked at them. They tried to peek in through the windows, but the Venetian blinds were drawn. So they went to a nearby diner, and every half hour, Dominic dialed Lothringer's number and was unable to reach him. They went home, and the next morning, Monday morning, they went back to Lothringer's house and found several patients waiting outside, and nobody had seen him. So they waited for several hours, and finally they went home, and because they were involved in something illegal, and you have to remember, in a criminal abortion death, the people who arranged the abortion could face criminal charges too, especially if the woman died, because this was homicide. So they contacted a lawyer. The lawyer told them, you need to contact the police. So they went to the office of Queens District Attorney Frank O'Connor the next day and made a report, but they withheld crucial information. They only told the police that Barbara had told them that she was pregnant, they'd had a fight, she left the house saying, I know what to do, and that they'd found Lothringer's name in Barbara's room and had gone to his home on Sunday only to find nobody there. So the officers went to Lothringer's house, rang the bell, knocked on the door, prowled around the outside, trying to peer in through the windows, and like Barbara's parents, the only response they got was a barking dog. And because they had insufficient information to get a warrant, that's all the further they could take it. So on Tuesday, Patrolman George Harshak of the Elmhurst station got a call from Lothringer. Harshak was both a patient and a friend. Lothringer told him he was away on business and had arranged to have Roto Rooter come and see about his stopped up drains. And he said he needed Harshak to get the spare keys from his parents to let the workman into the house. So workman came in, opened the main drain trap, and found pieces of bone and flesh, including identifiable pieces of human fingers. Harshak had been monitoring the work, so he called a detective right away. And somebody took the tissue to be examined, and yes, it definitely was human. So the authorities had workers digging up the sewer lines from Lothringer's house, and they troweled the sewer glob into screen frames and rinsed them, looking for anything of value they could find. And what they found was ultimately verified to be pieces of Barbara, her clothing, and her unborn baby. The assistant medical examiner said this was the first time he had ever encountered a body cut into such small pieces. Barbara and her unborn baby had essentially been cut into 2-inch cubes, and Lothringer had flushed the remains down the toilet. And the medical examiner estimated that it would have taken upwards of 24 hours to cut the body into such small pieces. Lothringer was probably at work on this grisly task, even as Barbara's frantic parents were at his door. The Daily News noted, Lothringer may even have watched the cleaning job from a discreet distance, ready to stage a reappearance and brazen out the disappearance of Barbara if the remains had been flushed away without discovery of the crime. So I'm sure Barbara's parents were watching anxiously the news coverage of human remains found in Lothringer's drains, and the police went to them and said, yeah, it's most likely Barbara. And that's when Dominic broke down, told the police the entire story. So he named Barbara's dentist, and there were 7 chunks of remains that had teeth in them, and they sent them to the dentist, and he positively identified them as Barbara. And Barbara's father also identified fragments of Barbara's clothing. But where was Lothringer? He had vanished along with Terry and his Dalmatian. The last people to report encountering him were his parents, who said that on Monday night their door had opened, his Dalmatian came in, and the door shut, and they assumed that that was him dropping the dog off. Now they launched an international manhunt. The U.S. authorities contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police because the Lothringer family had a hunting lodge near Montreal, and they also contacted Mexican authorities because Lothringer had a sister living in Mexico. And they also sought him in Terry's homeland of Cuba after an anonymous phone call gave a tip that they were there. And another false tip came from a Fort Worth dry cleaner who thought she identified the couple as people who had come in to drop off a pair of trousers. They also learned that Lothringer had contacted his answering service the day of Barbara's death, saying he was going on vacation and that any patients who called should be advised to find another doctor. The police had been caught off guard by Barbara's death and Lothringer's flight. They had been surveilling him for 3 weeks to build a case against him for running an abortion ring. They already had 2 abortion cases they were going to file. However, there was some confusion about whether it would be legal to tap his phones, so they didn't. And the district attorney said, if we had used wiretaps, this poor girl would have been alive today. So there were conflicting pictures about what kind of a man Lothringer was. His ex-wife said that he was a Jekyll and Hyde. He was a wonderful doctor, but a lousy husband. Neighbors reported he'd been a skirt chaser even before Felice, his wife, had taken the children and left him. Other neighbors described him as a fine man. And he was a little bit odd. I mean, he lived in this big fancy house. When police searched it, they found over 100 high-quality suits, a Lincoln, a Cadillac, and a station wagon in his garage, but he'd tend to his patients clad in dungarees, sweatshirt, and sneakers. His parents refused to talk to the press. And as police investigated, it became clear that Terry, the receptionist, was more than a receptionist. She eventually would claim to be his wife, but she'd been living in his house for about a year, and when they searched, they found a Valentine card addressed to her and signed by Lothringer, "You're the only real love of my life." And he was well-to-do. Reports were circulating that he kept as much as $1 million of cash in safe deposit box, and also rumors that he had begun stashing money from the abortions in a 2-foot square safe in his bedroom closet to hide the money from Felice. On September 10th of 1962, Lothringer and his girlfriend were located in the tiny Pyrenees mountain state of Andorra, population less than 7,000. The police had tracked him there from a postcard he'd mailed to a friend under a false name. They were living there as Mr. and Mrs. Victor Ray, but they stood out like a pair of sore thumbs. As one French official said, if criminals want to hide out in Europe, they had better pick a bigger place. Now, Andorra had no extradition treaty with the United States, so even identified, Lothringer and Teresa really had nothing to worry about if they stayed put. But they were caught when they crossed the border into France to look for new lodgings when their lease was about to expire. And the French police arrested him near the border and brought him to Perpignan. Sorry, I can't pronounce that. Now, Terry decided to stand by her man. She insisted on Lothringer's innocence. The truth is, we only saw the girl once. Her parents brought her up to my husband asking for an abortion, but since the girl was 5 months pregnant, my husband refused to operate and told them, "Do you want me to end up in the electric chair?" He advised the parents to let Barbara have the child in another U.S. city and have the child adopted there. And she said that Barbara's parents had insisted that they knew that, like all American doctors, he helped girls in Barbara's situation, and they threatened to tell the police about his other abortions, I guess the ones they learned about from friends, unless he did the abortion on Barbara. And she said that the reason she and Lothringer had fled after Barbara's disappearance was that he feared her parents would take revenge on him after her disappearance. So when French police contacted the district attorney's office and Lothringer contacted his attorney, Moses Falk, because Falk was in a trial, the district attorney got a 5-hour head start on him heading to France. And while Terry paced nervously outside the interview room, Lothringer told the DA that Teresa hadn't known about the abortion, which seems kind of lame. I mean, why did she think he was picking Barbara and her mother up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Why did she think Rose was sitting there waiting for her daughter and fretting? But he said that he had tried to talk the family out of the abortion because of how advanced Barbara's pregnancy was. And he said that he set a high fee of $1,000, which is getting close to 10 grand in 2022, in the hopes that Barbara's father would balk. And he openly discussed the abortion. He said that about 30 minutes into the procedure, Barbara suffered a fatal embolism. but he didn't say a lot about the dismemberment other than that he had done it to avoid involving Terry. Now, it wasn't until after Lothringer confessed that his attorney arrived, and he asserted that the police had not caught Lothringer on French soil, but had instead kidnapped him from Andorra. And he said that Lothringer's confession was false. Lothringer had only told that story in order to get the police to let Terry come visit him in his cell, because he said she'd kill herself if she wasn't allowed to see him. Now, back in the USA, manacled Lafremento was led down the ramp of an Air France plane by members of the Queen's District Attorney's Office. The Herald Statesman reported that Lothringer managed quick, tense smiles for photographers, but declined any comment, shaking his head negatively to questions. So, Attorney Falk met Lothringer at the airport. He asked for his client to be released on $10,000 bail, noting that other doctors charged with abortion manslaughter were released on even lower bail, and that Lothringer had an unblemished record right up until Barbara died. The district attorney's office, on the other hand, wanted a high bail, said this defendant ran away and did not notify anyone. He could run away again. This charge of manslaughter resulting from an abortion, ordinarily a person who takes another's life is charged with murder. Counsel should thank God for small favors. And it's conflicting whether Lothringer's bail was set at $50,000 or $100,000. Falk also said he was going to appeal to the UN Human Rights Commission, again arguing that Lothringer was kidnapped from Andorra and was lodged in a cell without heat or ventilation, with food unfit for human consumption and rats as his only companions. Now, Terry refused to testify before the grand jury and was charged with contempt of court. She surrendered to the police after giving a full statement to the assistant district attorney. She was granted immunity, but she was held on $30,000 bond as a material witness. Now, Lothringer was charged with first-degree manslaughter, abortion, second-degree assault, dissection of a human body, conspiracy to commit abortion, failure to report a death to the medical examiner, and removing and disturbing the clothing of a corpse. And 2 abortion charges were related to the cases where the young women survived. Conviction on the manslaughter charge alone could result in a 20-year prison sentence. So Lothringer entered his not guilty plea, and while awaiting trial, he made weekly journeys to Flushing, Long Island to visit Terry, who was now working at an antique shop. And Lothringer reportedly got a job as a manager of a paper plant in Indianapolis. But he dutifully returned to Queens for court appearances, but as the trial went through one delay after another, Barbara's father shouted at him one day, "Why don't you go home and blow your brains out, you murderer?" After jury selection and a dozen postponements, Lothringer surprised everybody by pleading guilty to a second-degree manslaughter charge in May of 1964. With that guilty plea, he faced a maximum of 15 years. And in spite of the flight risk, he was still free on $50,000 bail, which is nearly $500,000 in 2022 dollars. And after the guilty plea, Dominic was satisfied justice has been served. The district attorney's office has done a wonderful job. All we can say is thanks. And he put his arm around his weeping wife and said, instead of going to a graduation, we had to go to this. That was the month Barbara was going to graduate from college. Now, it wasn't until July 22nd of 1964 that Lothringer was finally sentenced to 2 to 8 years in Sing Sing. Upon hearing that sentence, Barbara's mother screamed, "Oh my God," and fainted. And after she was revived, she just sobbed, "A crime so vicious, how can he get off with so low a sentence?" And he has been impeding justice the past 2 years. Dominic said, "I expected him to get the full 15 years. This was discount justice. The district attorney's office told me that under the original 15-count indictment, this man could have gotten 99 years. He got 90% off." Lothringer's attorney was pleased, though. He had requested leniency, saying that Lothringer had lost his medical license and was seeking to rehabilitate himself. The judge said he'd gotten letters from patients urging mercy. And the judge justified the short sentence by saying that even if Lothringer was released after serving only 2/3 of the 2-year minimum, which would be 16 months, he would still be under parole and supervised for the full 8 years. And one of the interesting little after effects, well, not after effects, during the whole thing, the Daily News on June 13th, 1962, published some letters to the editor. One from a man who said, "Another young girl's life is snuffed out by an illegal abortion. Why are we such hypocrites in this country, allowing abortions to be performed every day by unscrupulous doctors under scary conditions, charging ridiculous fees, jeopardizing the victim's life when something goes wrong? Why don't we take a lesson from some other countries and save lives by legalizing the practice?" And evidently it was entirely lost on this guy that Barbara's parents had taken her to a highly reputable doctor. The only thing that the legal status of abortion changed was how much Lothringer charged and what he did after she died. So, you aren't saving lives necessarily by saying that it was okay for Lothringer to do what he did in terms of Barbara's death. Cutting her up and flushing her down the drains was another matter.